I always wanted to wear white, not in the way brides do but in the way doctors do. Ever since I was 6 I imagined walking through hospital corridors with a stethoscope bouncing around my neck and a calm strength in my steps. I used to fix up my stuffed animals when they had imaginary illnesses and whisper to them that everything would be okay, while other girls dreamed of stage lights and applause. I dreamed of surgeries and saving lives. I even kept a little notebook where I drew organs and wrote fake prescriptions in backward letters because I didn't know how to spell yet, but it was real to me. It was alive and pulsing like a heartbeat I was chasing. The first time I said it out loud that I wanted to be a doctor, my mom smiled like it was a sweet phase. My dad didn't say anything, just looked at me like I'd made a joke at the dinner table. They had other plans. My family had always been political. My grandfather was a councilman, my uncle ran 2 terms in the state legislature, and my father ran campaigns like they were chess matches. He used to say leadership is in our blood and the people need us. I didn't argue because back then I thought dreams could live alongside duty. I didn't know yet that sometimes your last name becomes your future and your voice becomes background noise. When I was 10 they enrolled me in youth leadership camp while my friends were at science fairs and first aid classes. When I was 12 I gave my first speech at a town hall about recycling, even though all I wanted was to sign up for biology club. I smiled, shook hands, and did my best imitation of a child politician. Everyone clapped except me. I remember staring at the reflection of my smile in the car window wondering who that girl even was, but I kept going because every time I tried to say I wanted something different my mother would gently explain that family legacy is a gift, not a burden, and my father would say we don't waste time on pipe dreams, we build empires. So I silenced myself. I buried my anatomy posters under policy books. I stopped doodling hearts and lungs and started memorizing campaign slogans. But at night when the world was quiet I would lie awake tracing the path from throat to sternum on my own body and wonder what it would feel like to actually help someone, not with laws, not with budgets, but with hands. I made it through high school with honors, but instead of applying to pre-med programs like my heart begged me to, I applied to political science schools like my parents expected. And when I got accepted to one of the top universities my parents threw a party so big the mayor came, everyone toasted to my bright future in politics. No one noticed. I barely touched my cake. College was a blur of debates, panels, networking events, and political theory classes. I made dean's list every semester. I won awards, but every time I walked past the medical building on campus I felt a pang so sharp it was like my own body was reminding me of what I gave up. I started volunteering at a free clinic secretly just for 2 hours a week. I told my parents it was part of a public health policy study, but really I just needed to feel it again, the pulse of care, the quiet dignity of helping someone without cameras or speeches. There was one night I'll never forget. A little boy came in coughing so hard he could barely breathe. His mom was panicking, the nurse was overwhelmed, and I stepped in without thinking, grabbed a cold compress, held his hand, and kept whispering that he was safe. When he finally calmed down and fell asleep in his mother's arms, she looked at me with tears and whispered, "Thank you, doctor." I almost corrected her, but I couldn't, because for the first time in years that word felt like it belonged to me. It was a name I had abandoned but never stopped answering to in my soul. After that night I started going to the clinic more, spending less time at student government meetings and more time folding gauze, and I started to realize that maybe living for others' expectations isn't noble, it's just another way to disappear. The more I volunteered, the more I felt like myself again, not the version my parents molded, but the version I used to see in the mirror as a little girl, the one who wanted to heal, not to debate, the one who dreamed in blood cells, not billboards. But the deeper I fell back into that part of me, the more tension grew at home. My parents noticed my shift. At first they chalked it up to mid-semester stress, but then I missed a major policy gala to shadow a nurse during an overnight shift, and I skipped a family fundraiser to help coordinate vaccinations for underprivileged kids. My mother cornered me one morning with her hands on her hips and worry painted across her face. She said, "Your father and I are proud of your passion, but remember where your future lies." I didn't answer right away. I couldn't, because her words weren't cruel, they were laced with love, but that love came with expectations heavy enough to crush dreams. I said, "I'm just exploring public health from the ground level." She nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Then came the night that changed everything. I was asked to speak at a state youth leadership banquet as the keynote. It was a huge honor. My father wrote half the speech himself. He beamed as I rehearsed it in the living room and made small tweaks with a red pen like he was editing his own legacy. But when I stood behind that podium, something inside me cracked. The room was full of bright young minds, kids who wanted to change the world. I looked out and thought, what if one of them wants to be a doctor but feels trapped by expectations like I was? And in that moment I went off script. I put the papers down, I took a breath, and I told them the truth. I said I had spent most of my life trying to be someone I wasn't because I loved my family and wanted to make them proud, but that love had made me hide from myself. I said I wanted to heal, not just inspire, that I had learned the difference between leading people and truly serving them, and that I hoped each person in that room would have the courage to follow their calling, even if it looked nothing like the plan others had for them. The room was silent. Then someone clapped, then another, until the entire hall rose to their feet. I felt both terrified and free. When I got home my parents were waiting. My father had already seen the video online. He wasn't angry, he was quiet. He asked, "Do you really not want this life?" I whispered, "I never did." He nodded once then walked away. My mother cried in the kitchen for an hour. She said she didn't understand where this came from. I told her it didn't come from anywhere new, it had always been there, she just never looked past the surface. There was a cold distance between us for weeks, but I didn't regret it because for the first time in years I had spoken with my own voice. I started researching post-baccalaureate pre-med programs. It was late to switch paths, but not impossible. I knew it would mean starting over. I would be behind, I would be older than my classmates, but I didn't care. I had already wasted too much time living a life that wasn't mine. I applied in secret, took the required exams, worked double shifts to save money. The clinic director wrote me a recommendation letter so beautiful I cried when the acceptance email came. I didn't tell anyone for a whole day. I just sat in my tiny apartment rereading it over and over like a lifeline. That night I emailed my parents. The subject line was, "I need to be honest." The body of the email was simple: "I love you, but I need to love me too. I'm going to medical school." I didn't sleep that night, but in the morning my phone buzzed. It was a message from my dad. He had forwarded my email to the entire extended family with one sentence attached: "She found her voice." And I couldn't be prouder. I cried, but this time not from fear, from freedom. Medical school was nothing like I imagined, but everything I needed. It wasn't glamorous. There were sleepless nights, anatomy labs that smelled like preservatives, and exams that made my heart pound like it was trying to escape my chest, but I felt alive for the first time in my life. I woke up with purpose that was my own, not inherited, not expected. Mine. Some days were so hard I wanted to quit. There were moments I questioned everything, but then I'd remember the little girl with the plastic stethoscope and the quiet fire in her chest. I owed it to her to keep going, and I did. I studied through tears, practiced procedures with shaking hands, shadowed doctors who showed me not just the science but the heart of medicine. I learned how to listen not just to symptoms but to silence. I learned that healing isn't always curing. Sometimes it's sitting beside someone in their pain and reminding them they're not alone. That lesson changed everything. In my third year I was assigned to a rural rotation in a community that had limited access to care. It was there I met Mr. Delaney. He was 83, lived alone, and refused to go to the hospital despite worsening symptoms. I visited him every week. At first he wouldn't speak, just stared at the TV while I checked his vitals, but slowly he opened up, told me about his wife who passed 20 years ago, his dog who used to wait at the door, and how he didn't think anyone cared if he lived or died. I looked him in the eye and said, "I care," and he cried. That day I realized something. This was the life I was meant for, not the speeches, not the campaigns, this showing up, caring, healing. Graduation came faster than I expected. My parents flew in for the ceremony. My father wore a suit darker than usual, and my mother clutched tissues before we even entered the hall. When they called my name and said "Doctor," I heard my mother gasp. I looked into the crowd and saw my father wiping his eyes. After the ceremony he hugged me tighter than he ever had before. He said, "I thought I knew what was best for you, but you taught me that real leadership is listening, and you listened to your heart. I love you for that." We both cried. That summer I started my residency in emergency medicine. It was chaos and beauty and heartbreak all at once. Some days broke me, others built me, but every shift felt like home. And then one night everything came full circle. A young girl was brought in after a car accident, scared, bruised, barely speaking. As I stitched her forehead she whispered, "I don't want to be a lawyer." I paused. "What do you want to be?" She blinked at me and said, "A veterinarian, but my parents say it's not practical." I smiled. "You'd be a great one." She asked, "How do you know?" And I said, "Because I used to want to be something else too, but then I remembered who I was, and that made all the difference." She smiled through the pain, and I knew I wasn't just healing bodies, I was helping others find their voice. Years passed. I opened a small clinic in an underserved neighborhood, hired staff who believed in dignity before paperwork. We treated every patient like they mattered because they did. My mother eventually started volunteering there. She said it reminded her of the people behind the policies. My father helped fundraise for new equipment. He still attended political events, but now he introduced me not as his successor but as his daughter, the doctor. One evening after closing up the clinic I sat on the steps watching the sunset. A little boy walked by holding his mother's hand. He pointed at the sign with my name and asked, "Mommy, is she the one who helps people feel better?" She nodded, and I felt tears rise, not of sadness but of completion. I had taken the long way, the hard way, but it led me exactly where I was meant to be. And now every time a little girl tells me she wants to be a doctor, I kneel down, look her in the eyes and say, "You already are," because it starts the moment you believe it, and no one gets to take that from you, not even the people who love you most, not even the world, especially not the world.